Okay, so let's get started. Guys, welcome back to Civilization Unraveled. It's been a very, very, very long time since I last posted a video, and here's why. So, I've decided I'm gonna be doing a completely new format as compared to last time because the I didn't think the last time the format was any good because it seemed too formal and it seemed too drab and boring. So, I'm gonna change everything right now. And today we're actually going to be talking about a really interesting topic. Originally, I actually planned this to be about the future of civilization. And I had a lot of inspiration from Star Trek and stuff like Stargate and Babylon 5 and other famous sort of science fiction shows and books like Dune and Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy and stuff like that. But here's the thing, I just realized before we go into the past and the future and ethics and philosophy and economics and all of that, it's really important that people try to understand what exactly the problem is that civilization tries to solve. And there's actually multiple large major problems that we form civilizations to solve. And funnily enough, civilizations weren't formed to solve any of these problems. They were generally formed for one thing and one thing only. Simply put, we weren't capable of doing much alone. So, what we did was we banded together to form tribes, which later gained their own customs, traditions, beliefs, became larger, became communities, had languages of their own evolving, merged with other tribes, so on and so forth. And then finally we got to the stage where we started building individual civilizations. Civilizations with their own technological strengths, their own focuses, their own geological, their own technology would often be depending on where the civilization was formed. And obviously, the first civilizations, almost all of them are formed in river basins because that's the most resourceful area because agriculture is possible there. Then near forests again because you can hunt stuff and eat meat as well. And then there's a lot of work for people to do, and they'd move on from the hunter-gatherer stage to the farming agrarian side, the more civilized, less violent way of doing things, and that then you would have stuff like other artisanal crafts like pottery or making clothes and stuff like that. All of that would be formed near river basins, which is the ideal place. But again, different river basins tend to have very different characteristics. Take Egypt, for instance, which was formed near, say, a complete desert. The entire culture of the place is fundamentally based on the fact that it's near a desert. You worship the gods they worship, the culture they have, what they eat. Well, not what they eat today, because today Egypt is no longer beholden to the same customs it had, say, when it was part of the ancient Egyptian civilization before the time of the Greeks even. But because after that there was a lot of historical conflicts that it faced. First from Alexander, and then closer, then there was Arabians who came in there, and then there was stuff. So this went on for a while. But the general rule is A, you can generally predict where a civilization is going to be formed. And B, despite this, there's going to be some differences in the geological states of most civilizations, which can more or less account for differences in things as far ranging as food to religion to culture to technology to the way their homes are built to the way they do stuff, morning to night, everything. But funnily enough, as civilizations grew, they started facing the same problem that every single group of people faces. And this is something that's generally in philosophy called the hedgehog problem, hedgehog paradox, or the hedgehog problem, whichever one you prefer. I'm reasonably certain that hedgehog paradox is generally what the it's not a formal term, of course, but the generally accepted term is. And what the hedgehog paradox is basically this. So, as humans, it's generally a well-known statement that, and it's a very well-known adage, in fact, that man is a social animal. We like to work together and we like to get together, and we like socializing. Most of us, personally speaking, I'm pretty much an introvert, so yeah. But in either case, most people need to get along with someone before, or without which they don't see any real fun or purpose in life. The However, once you get along with other people and once you start socializing, you face a problem, and that problem is people are different. Now, why is this a problem? So here's why. Sometimes people can get along despite their differences because they're not that different, or they have shared beliefs or shared uh, interests, or even just similar personalities. But what do you do when you have someone who shares no life experiences with you, who shares barely any beliefs with you, who doesn't even like you personally, or the other way around? The usual social tactic that people use is they downplay their differences and they don't say what they think. But that's not what we want, really. Within each of us, there is this fundamental urge to be authentic about who we are and say what we want to say and not face the consequences for doing so. In this case, that would be either ostracization from society, or just not making a friend, or losing a friend because you have different opinions, or you've offended somebody. And none of us really want that. But at the same time, we can't stand not being authentic. It Not only does it seem fake to put on a mask and work around in society, but there's also the fact that to a certain extent, there is no point socializing if we're not who we are. So, and the general tactic is to create a toned down version of yourself with just enough individuality to stand out, and yet just enough, like, niceness, for the lack of a better word, to fit in. But, and that's what the ordinary human will generally do. But the conflict still exists, and if you generalize this and abstract it out, it is the fundamental conflict of all society. I'm going to give this another set of terms just so that you understand where this is going, because funnily enough, it's something you read about in the newspaper every single day. You see it all over the place, but you don't really ever see why things are the way they are. And the two words I'm going to be telling you about is individual versus collective. And here's why this is so important. Our ethics, our morality, our beliefs as a society tend to come from a collective shared opinion. You you this is something important in debates. This is something important in practically every discussion you have about society as a whole. At some point, there are some shared beliefs that all people have. If you can't start from a common ground, you can't really have an argument, because it's not really an argument if you're not starting from the same place and then saying this leads to X conclusion and this leads to Y conclusion, because that's what arguments are about. You debate about stuff, about the consequences of a certain set of actions, and then you say why. But or not even a certain set of actions, just a certain set of facts, or a certain set of hypothetical outcomes, or hypothetical, say, anything in fact. But you start from a shared set of at least assumed axioms, if not beliefs, in order to have anything close to a discussion, a debate, an argument, or even a civilized society. The problem here is that collective beliefs, by and large, tend to be A, irrational, B, very subjective, and C, don't appeal to everyone. Funnily enough, you'd think that having just collective beliefs and not allowing individual beliefs would help. But here's the thing: every collective belief has a social hierarchy. Some societies think that, and this comes all over the place, traits, type of behavior, uh, anything really. And these hierarchies are generally hierarchies of values, and not just values but traits, again, as I mentioned before, that are important to, say, the society in question. So some societies may be like, uh, the most important people of our society are the people who work the hardest. That's the trait they respect, conscientiousness. So what do you do about lazy people? Because lazy people won't like that society. Other societies, just hypothetically, might say the most important trait in our society is intelligence, or creativity. What do you do about the dumb people then, or the people who are not creative enough? They're gonna feel left out because they're at the bottom of the food chain. And that's what really starts individualism. What individualism really is simply this: just like each society collectively has a set of beliefs, each individual has his own set of beliefs, values, traits, so on and so forth. So let's take, say, a profession like an artist is generally going to value creativity, not creativity so much as artistic ability, because, and I don't know why people think this, but art isn't that creative. Or, okay, let me rephrase. Art isn't A, the most creative thing on planet Earth, B, necessarily creative in the first place, and C, uh, the only creative thing on planet Earth. In fact, I'd wager the single best measure of creativity is not how artistic you are, but how good you are at solving novel problems or creating new concepts. A lot of people think creativity is about. Okay, wait, I'm going on a rant now. Sorry. Uh, Back to the topic. Back to the topic. So, the funny thing here is individualism generally arises from an individual's personal experiences that differ from the collective experiences, the collective beliefs of the society. So, if a society tells you the best way to win is to work hard, and then if you work hard and you don't win, the best way to win isn't get up in the ladder of life or become successful, whatever that may mean. And if you work hard and you don't succeed, then you're obviously going to think that that collective belief that society holds is completely untrue. Which, again, because you didn't work hard and successful, you can generally state that it is not a perfectly applicable belief. Regardless of how generally applicable it is, you can say it's not 100% true. Here's the funny problem with individualism: there's no guarantee that either collectivism or individualism is right, because individualism is based on beliefs that have no necessary rational backing behind them. Your individual ideas could be on the basis of something as inane as an emotional belief, just the same as collectivism. And both collectivism and individualism generally have a purpose, right? Because collectivism's purpose is pretty obvious. Collective beliefs keep a society together, whether that's religious beliefs or customs or even economic methods or some sort of a community generally, or a civilization, needs an identity in order to make itself a civilization. We define ourselves by an us versus them polemic. Those who are within the civilization and those who are outside the civilization. This is also one of the important reasons why, at least for some time now, despite general attempts to make groups larger than nations like the EU or the UN, and even say hypothetically assume we were trying to build a world government, that really wouldn't ever work, because, and it's not working right now, because of how people think. People don't really care about stuff like a better future or anything like that. What they care about, they don't really care about the us versus them polemic either, but it's ingrained within them because of how we're structured. Like it or not, the logical parts of who we are very weak compared to the sort of more emotional and animalistic parts of us that generally tends to simplify and divide things as far as possible so that you can understand it. And that's a failure in and of itself because of uh, how we tend to break down the world into. First off, it's not bad to break down the world into black and white, because in the end that's what logic is about. You break down into things that are true or false. There's nothing that's half true or half false, or even say you break down into stuff into things that are perfectly black or white. But the problem is we tend to oversimplify things by doing too few, or the black and white world we construct is lacks too much nuance. Okay, wait, that sentence made no sense, but you get what I'm trying to say, right? The the worldview we have, generally speaking, the worldview any average person has lacks nuance almost entirely. It's on the basis of axiomatic beliefs that you can't prove or disprove. Most likely can disprove, but not to the individual in question, because those beliefs form his or her worldview. Those axiomatic beliefs could be anything. It could be a political orientation, an economic orientation, a religion, but all of them would be based on a fundamental axiomatic belief about some value. That value could be anything: fairness, equality, something as absurd as, say, you could even have this. You could even base an entire worldview on this absurd belief that uh, aubergines are better than zucchinis, or something. Yeah, my jokes are terrible. Trust me. But in either case, that's what individual beliefs are too. They're as non-nuanced and as simplistic as collective beliefs, and as easily disprovable. Unless you have the facts as the basis of all your beliefs are easily, very simply disprovable on the basis of the fact that your base beliefs are wrong. Either wrong or not proven or not even likely. But coming back to the actual problem, now that we've set up the stage for what is to come, the problem with individualism versus collectivism is that we want to have both. We want to have our cake and eat it too. And here's the problem with having your cake and eating it too: it's not logically possible. You can't be completely authentic and still have everyone around as your friend unless you're living in this absurd hypothetical world where everyone shares the same beliefs, and or is so equally kind and completely just accepting of different people's opinions. And there's a reason why we don't accept different people's opinions, because our worldview depends on our opinions being right. That's what's so genuinely terrifying about human nature and human civilizations. Not our mental health, even our emotional health, for some absurd reason depends on us believing that we're right about something. And the reason somewhat logical, in that being wrong about something is a sign of danger. At least it was during the earlier stages of our evolutionary for the lack of a better word, career. In that, if we were wrong, so let's say, I'll give you a very, very simplistic, very, very absurd example, but bear with me. Assume you saw an animal and and you thought it was harmless. Now, if it turned out to be harmful, you're wrong and you're going to die because you're wrong, because that animal is going to eat you. When you go to, pet it like you usually pet a dog or a cat. I'm just assuming Neanderthals did that too, I'm not sure. Seems to be a pretty integral part of human life. But, anyways, that's why we're so afraid of being wrong, and that's why we keep trying to correct our worldview, not by correcting our own points of view or correcting our own facts, but by literally twisting reality to fit what we thought it was. And this causes a lot of problems because that means you can't really ever, it's very, 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 very hard to convince someone to change their opinions on whether it's an opinion on economics or politics, or because I've seen it this way. I've had a bunch of debates with people, and all the time it's two sides either trying to win or trying to convince the other that their side is wrong, that the side that the other person is on is wrong. And that never really works because all you're doing is disproving the concrete points a person makes or using your own concrete points. You're never understanding the abstract value that the person holds. And really, funnily enough, even if both people were perfectly logical and perfectly aware of all the facts, there's a huge chance they'd come to different conclusions. And here's why. Because they have different values. If say if you're someone who's concerned with fairness, you're going to make sure you build a world where everyone gets what they deserve, regardless of what people who don't deserve anything have to suffer. But if you're someone who's concerned with stopping people from suffering, you don't really care about fairness. You just care about making sure no one has to go hungry when they go back home, or no one has to starve to death, or something like that. And that forms very, 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 very different worldviews and very, 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 very different priorities. Because the person who doesn't care about fairness doesn't really care about what's morally right in the terms of the person who cares about fairness, and vice versa. They care about getting what they want at the end of the day, period. And what they want are two different things, which is another really, 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 really big problem, because that means they're going to argue. And if they're going to argue, at some given point in time, it might end up in a fight, which might get physical, and this is not just on an individual scale. When a set of two people fight, they're childish. That's it. Everybody else either ignores it or goes in to help them or lands on one side or nothing. In the end, it ends. It doesn't have a big consequence. But multiply this by the number of people on our planet, in any country or in all of the countries combined. What happens? Yeah, that's if you're thinking riots, wanton violence all around, people killing other people, looting other people's stuff, so on and so forth. You're right. Which is funnily why we need a common base in ethics. Because it's perfectly okay to have disagreements based on individualism versus collectivism or fairness and equality or anything like that in something as simplistic and as in something as not even as simplistic but as lacking in consequences economics. Well, not really, because then whoever's in power could make decisions that are absolutely terrible for some or the other portion of society. But it's not as dangerous as having base ethics that differ from person to person. There's always this absurd question of who's going to decide what the base ethics are. But that's not really a question at all, is it? Think about it. If you don't decide the base ethics from the objective logical standpoint that you want to make sure no one has to suffer some sort of extreme damage to their lives or to their property, you don't really build a civilization that makes any sense. You can't build a civilization that's based on looting other people's property or killing them or taking away their freedom in any way and expect it to succeed, at least not within members of the same civilization. It doesn't succeed, it fails. Every single instance of a civilization that hasn't granted some basic fundamental freedoms to its people has failed. The flip side to this is, what are those fundamental freedoms? The only ethical base for any society that any society should have are the right to an individual to his belongings or her belongings, to their life and to their freedom. Anything else is an add-on. Quite frankly speaking, anything else is an add-on. And add-ons are fine, but they're not fundamental. A civilization can survive without any other add-ons, quite frankly speaking. Again, I've been using quite frankly speaking. Quite frankly speaking, I've been using the phrase quite frankly speaking quite often now. But bear with me again. So a civilization can survive without having anything else except these fundamental rights or fundamental freedoms. But if you take one of these away, it's just chaos and mayhem. So that's just common starting ground. But that still leaves the question of individualism versus collectivism. Which one wins? And funnily enough, there's no clear answer. And the reason is they both have different pros and cons. In a world where everyone's free to speak their mind, the same people that speak their mind face the consequences of speaking their mind. And those consequences aren't legal. They're just social, they're just political. And social and political consequences can be as dangerous as legal consequences. They're even economic for that matter. Because let's say you were in a state that has the absolute right to free speech, and you told a friend of yours, he or she is an idiot. They're not going to be a friend with you anymore, regardless of whether you have the right to say that. And to a great extent, there's two different types of authentic people, and there's two different types of people who want social harmony, which is the individualism versus collectivism side. Because individuals want authenticity at all costs. They want to say what they feel at any given moment. And people who are on the collective side just want there to be harmony between everybody else. They don't care about whether you feel good outside. They don't want to see fights. They don't want to see arguments. They don't want to get caught up in some sort of altercation of any sort. They just want social harmony at all costs, and funnily enough, each side sees the other as very different. So the collective side will always see the individual side as very selfish or very self-obsessed, to the point where they don't really understand the individual side. And the individual side almost always sees the collective side as fake and made up and not authentic at all. And these two sides tend to clash. But more often than not, most people are actually caught in the middle, because there are individuals who want to be authentic and have their cake too, in the sense that they want to be authentic but still have the social harmony, which can only ever be possibly achieved in a very, 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 very unlikely hypothetical world where everyone agrees with them on everything. And on the other hand, you have the collectivists who want to be able to, somewhere deep inside, want to be able to say what they want to say. But they can't do that because they'll have to face the risk of not having social harmony. But then there's the extremists who don't really care. I shouldn't call them extremists because they're not bad people of any sort. But they're on either extreme side, which is the highly authentic individual who doesn't really care about what people think of him, or whether he or she has any sort of relations with anybody else. He or she or they have any sort of relations with anybody else. They just care about saying what they want to say and getting on with it, which is fine. And again, on the opposite end, there's the collective people who essentially go so far as to force other authentic people from not being authentic for the sake of social harmony. And that's another extreme worldview that, funnily enough, impacts everybody. And the danger of both extremely authentic people and extremely collectivist people is that they tend to force their views on everyone else. The authentic person, by offering ultimatums, if you had an extremely authentic friend who said, if you don't agree with me, I'm not going to be your friend, or something like that, then you're just like, either you're going to leave the guy's friendship or the girl's friendship, or yeah, or you're just going to end up in, say, you're just going to fake agree with them so that they just shut up. But in either case, it's going to impact you either mentally or emotionally, or I mean, not physically, but either mentally or emotionally. And on the other side, if you have a collectivist who basically says, don't spout any opinion, don't say anything that's contrary to what the average person thinks, that's also forcing people to do something they don't want to do. And that both have dangers, because if you oppress individualists for too long, they sort of erupt like a volcano, and they all you just the effects are horrifying, because it's just complete chaos. And on the other hand, if you're too collectivist, you're too oppressive, it ends up becoming a democratic situation where you're right because more people agree with you, and that's a logical fallacy. It's called the argumentum ad populum. Just because a lot of people agree with you about something does not mean it's true. But in collectivist ideologies, people force that on other people. So that's where it starts failing. The third, and so how do you resolve this? I think I mentioned it before actually, but the only way you resolve this is you base everything on the facts. You don't care about collective ideology, you don't care about individual ideology. You say this purely, bluntly, and clearly: people's beliefs don't matter. They don't. They obviously don't, because unless your beliefs are A, completely logically based, and B, not factually wrong in any sense of the term, they're just that. They're beliefs, they're opinions, they're not facts. And you shouldn't make decisions on anything but facts if you want to have some sort of civil, successful society that's progressing at a good rate. And here's the thing, funnily enough, ethics have a logical basic. Almost all ethical rules that succeed through a long range of time and tend to create prosperous societies have a logical basis, and the logical basis is intent driven. Ethics are an if-then statement meant to achieve a certain goal. The ethical and legal laws are the equivalent of a computer program. They're there to make sure that you do, as individuals, you stay within the bounds of what's appropriate so that everyone can progress and everyone can collectively work together. So in some sense, you're destroying collective morality by imposing an equally different collective morality. But here's the difference fundamentally. Once you base your base assumptions on facts, and then you base your ethics on intent, and the intent in this case is to create a society which is prosperous and works together well, you tend to have both more social harmony and more authenticity. And here's why. In a society where it's perfectly okay to have different opinions, people can get along while having different opinions. As long as your opinion's not too radical or completely illogical or not based in facts, you're fine. The range of opinions is actually going to get smaller and wider at the same time, in that you're going to constrain the absolute number of opinions, but more opinions within that small constrained range of logical opinions is going to be acceptable. And people can accept each other having different opinions, because that's what like healthy societies are made of. High degrees of individualism when it comes to stating things that are true and make sense, and high degrees of collective social harmony because everyone accepts that everyone else has a different point of view with a reason, and as long as they can justify their reason, it's perfectly valid for them to have their point of view. The only difference is the fundamental weights that they apply to things. And decisions can get made in this society faster because there are at least some ethical basis to what people are doing, and some logical basis, and some factual basis. So you get faster decisions, you get better decisions, you get more well-made decisions, and I mean that's it. That's great. And That's how you solve the problem of individualism versus collectivism, and that's how most societies try to solve it. However, sometimes they fail and the results are pretty horrifying. In other words, those civilizations collapse. And on that utterly horrifying and completely pessimistic note, I'm gonna end this session as I usually do. Bye.